Welcome to the Sedona Soul Sisters Show, down-to-earth discussions on spirituality, metaphysics, paranormal, and healing topics. The Sedona Soul Sisters are myself, Ivory Lanou, Terry Ann Russell, and my partner Roz Reynolds, who is probably not able to get a signal. She's driving back home from California today, but she might pop in later. Today's topic is addiction from a spiritual view, what it's about, ways you can support someone with an addiction. If you have any questions or comments for today's topic, you can raise your hand if you're here in the show live and we'll unmute you. You can ask your question. We'll be glad to answer it live, or you can ask it in the chat room. I just opened it and you're welcome to ask it there. We'll also answer it live on the show. If you're watching the show later on YouTube, feel free to email us any questions you have. We're here to help you. You can send it to my email, ivory@sedonasoulsisters.com. I'll pass it on to the other ladies, and we will get back to you. So don't feel like you have to be here live to get your questions answered. Oh, goodness. This is a big topic. Something, first I worked with this at the psychiatric hospital during the 7.5 years I worked there, and later director of mental health, but it came home for me when I was in a relationship with a guy whose young daughter, 14-year-old daughter, had a heroin and cocaine addiction, and the mother sent her to come live with us, and she did. Because of my background, she thought that I'd be able to help her, and that was a really, really eye-opening experience to be from the other perspective of the family side, and because I became like a second mother to her instead of the professional side. So I have great empathy from both sides of that. And Terry Ann, I know I was thinking about you earlier today, thinking about this topic, and I think that a lot of people who come to us for healing actually have addictions, or they have someone in their life with addiction. It's so draining on a person's energy, both to go through it and also to support someone and love someone who has an addiction.
I agree. I think a lot of people may not realize what a true addiction is. I mean, it can be as simple as, being addicted to TV. I mean, anything it can be addicting. A lot of clients of mine have had people in their lives, so codependency comes into it. A lot of my clients are codependent, not a surprise, as I was codependent at one time. Also, sexual addiction I believe sexual addiction is on the rise. And because I could tell you, my kids were born in the early 90s. Before that, internet, throughout, I think maybe they were like 10 or 11, and the internet started to come out. But even in the beginning, you couldn't access stuff like porn. But as they got older, it was very easy for them to be able to access stuff like pornography online, and then not knowing or understanding what they were actually seeing. So it's not like going buying a magazine at the store. They can be inundated with so much garbage on there. So I think, sexual addiction is also on the rise as we've come into the internet age. Do you agree?
Sexual addiction is the fastest growing addiction in the world. And it's something, unfortunately, I've become an expert in, having been in a relationship with somebody, and I tried to help them, tried to support them. I dove into that like I was getting a PhD in it, and learned everything I could to try to help myself too, just because I needed to be able to take a more clinical, dispassionate look at it to not continue to get hurt myself. So what I learned is that many experts consider sexual addiction to be a chemical addiction because of the chemicals it sends coursing through your brain. Is very much like a serious drug like heroin, and that it's a chemical rush that they're addicted to. And I think that's a lot like, I'm going to tell you mine. I don't have it anymore because I took it away from myself. But I love to shop. I love to shop for clothing and shoes and jewelry. You're not surprised, are you, Terry? And so
I'm not.
I did that for a while. I had credit cards, and I had a problem with that. And I maxed out my credit cards a couple times, paid them down. So I remember that I would go into a department store like Macy's or Dillard's, And as soon as I stepped through the doors, I felt this rush of, oh my gosh, the endorphins was just like almost giddy. And my husband at the time knew it. He saw it and he loved that. He would give me like, here's $600 for your birthday. Buy whatever you want. Let's go to shopping spree. Because he knew, he could see it. But I realized that's not healthy. Anything that you're doing to get that rush in an unhealthy way, that's hurting you financially, anytime it's getting in the way, and when finances get in the way, that's a big thing. So I just haven't had a credit card for a long time. So if I don't have the money in my account, I don't buy it. So I just don't shop like that anymore. And it's been about 11 years and I've been fine. I'm absolutely fine. I'm not going to lie. I still like to go to a store and I'll try on a bunch of things, but I only get something I absolutely need. But it's hard to curb these things that give us that feel-good rush. And I was reading something on the news yesterday, maybe the day before, was they were talking about positive things you could do to feel good during this COVID time, other than, and I'm like, oh my gosh, other than watching TV and eating carbs. And I'm like, I hadn't really thought about that, but I'm like, oh, I've been watching my TV because I'm home alone and I'm getting stuff done and I just kind of have it on the background. And I definitely have eaten more carbs and I'm like, oh my gosh, just subconsciously I'm gravitating to these negative feel-good things. So I thought that this show would probably be a good idea for us all. And I know Terry Ann is a healer. You have to be, I know I have had people come in who are addicted, or usually it's the family of someone who's addicted because they're in a healthier place to reach out for help. I'm helping some family members like that right now. And it's rough.
It is rough. And I think I commend those people. I know what it was like to be on the other side of that, also having been in a relationship with somebody who had a sexual addiction. I was not as spiritually open as you were at the time, so I didn't really understand what all of that meant at that time until much later. But what my clients, I try to get them to understand is they're like, well, they were addicted to gambling and now they're addicted to drinking. So they got off the gambling kick, but they really just traded that addiction for something else. And so it's not really, like you said, you were able to stop it. When you're clearly healing what's causing that issue, that's where we get to be in the place of understanding that, it may be a past life contract. It may be an oath or a vow or something that we took, or it may simply be a lesson that we haven't completed before in another life. So in this life now, again, here we are redoing this lesson. But by simply trading one addiction for another,
you're still an addict. So I want to say something really quick too, because you brought up a really important topic, this codependency. And I want to make sure that all our light workers out there understand that by being a light worker, you are intrinsically by nature a codependent. And it took me a long time to figure that out, because since I was a little girl, I just wanted to help people. And that's always been the driving force for me. And I have far too many times wanted to just help somebody way beyond what is healthy for me. And I did go through a year of CODA meetings, and it didn't take me long into it to realize, to make the connection between being a light worker and how hard it is to fight the codependency, to really protect yourself when you've got that strong desire that you're here to help people. So it's natural to want to put others ahead of yourself, but sometimes that's okay and sometimes it's not. And at that point of where it's not is different for each one of us. But if you're a light worker, this is a show for you too, because you're going to need to definitely pay attention to that. Terry Ann, some of the reasons you just said, I totally agree with. The past life connections, the contracts we haven't fulfilled, and I really feel like at the core of all addictions, what lies there is a spiritual void.
Yes. Oh my God. I have that in my notes too.
If you have unaddressed or inadequately addressed trauma, that manifests itself in different ways. You will try to cope with it in unhealthy ways. So I've noticed as a person working in mental health that it's very clear that when somebody is hurting and they don't feel comfortable dealing with their feelings, they have feelings. Let's just say they have feelings they're uncomfortable with and they don't know what to do with it. They look for a way to stuff it down. And that can be sex, drinking, drugs. It can be over exercising, you know, because that gives you endorphins too. So it can be so many different things that people do to not feel. And there's no way to break an addiction without diving into the feelings underneath that. That's where you fill up your spiritual void. That's where you figure out what happened in my life that has left this void, and what do I need to do to get that filled up in a healthy way? Because until that happens, you'll be doing what Terry Ann said, bouncing from addiction to addiction, trying to avoid hurting. And who hasn't been there? Oh my goodness, I'll never forget the day that my ex-husband committed suicide and I had to tell my little girl, you know what I did?
Yeah.
I grabbed a sponge, and I am not the greatest like housekeeper. Like my husband at the time was really into it, thank God. I grabbed a sponge and I'm like wiping everything down, and he had to come over and like put his hand on mine and take it. He's like, Ivory, you need to put the sponge down. You need to talk to Michelle, you know? And I was trying to avoid that because I did not want to tell her about her dad, and she could tell something was wrong. You know, that was, looking back on that, I'm like, I was just desperate to avoid that conversation. But it had to happen, you know, it had to happen.
Right.
So
And
I think,
avoidance is another one of those things, like in grief too. Some people do end up avoiding, um, speaking about addiction, or sharing those painful things that you have to go through. It's really hard. You know, the definition, I wrote down, the definition of addiction is being enslaved by or bound to. I think it's really interesting how even the 12-step program has a spiritual component to it. So it's again that mind, body, soul. It's all of it together, and you can't just say, "Oh, right, on the physical, I healed the physical, so now everything's great." I've had this discussion with my mom because there's some medical issues she's having. I said, you also have to work on the spiritual aspect of that as well. Yes, the physical is important, the mental and the emotional and the spiritual. It's that mind, body, soul connection.
yeah, you get your spiritual goes out of whack, or your mental or emotional pulls your physical out of whack, and it just goes round and round.
Mm-hmm.
There's a quote I found on a site that was really good. It's like a addiction program that talks about spirituality. And they say addiction drains the spirit and gives nothing in return. And I think that's so true. It just takes and takes and takes. So I think having a change of viewpoint of where we begin to see the addict not as this bad person that needs to be punished and shamed or shunned by society, but a sick person that needs treatment. That kind of changes the tone of the approach we take to it. And I hope that it would help take some of the self-blame parents, families tend to put on themselves, like, oh, if I hadn't done this, or if I'd only done more of that. There's nothing that says for sure. Terry, and you brought something up, and I was reading on another site, and it was really interesting about between ancestors and ghosts as what people report as the spiritual cause of addiction. Ancestors, so in other words, spirit of our family, account for 30% of spiritual reasons people turn to addiction, while negative energies or ghosts account for 70%. So there's this whole component of people who are who are seeing spirit, who are hearing them, who want to avoid that, who, I can relate to that too, who want to avoid that, want to shut it out. And then the whole thing too, we would be remiss if we don't mention this, but when somebody is possessed by a spirit, this or an entity, the entities often want to experience the pleasures, what they call the pleasures of human existence. And one of those they like is drugs. And it might be the entity that wants to experience the drugs that entices that human into the journey, into the addiction.
And
So
so the
there's
human doesn't really understand that that's what's happening. And the more that they go down that road of drinking or drugs, your frequency is lowered. The entity has a real easy time at mastering, achieving what they want.
I had a client who approached me about a relative who was drinking heavily, but as soon as I saw them on camera, I saw an entity rise it up from their shoulder, a dark entity, and look right at me and then sink back into their body, their energetic field. And I knew that's what was going on with them, but that person was too possessed by the spirit to hear that or want to address it. The spirit was in charge, the entity was in charge of the human at that point. And they ended up getting like psychiatric meds, real heavy psychiatric meds or something. But these things happen. I mean, it's just not a theory. This is something we see in our work. And I wish I didn't see it, but I have to say it's happening more frequently of late.
I think so too. And I think what people need to understand is there can be that spiritual component to it. And it also could be that someone, like you said, a parent is enabling them. A lot of times, as you said, as a parent, we don't want our children to suffer and we think that we're helping them. Oh, I need $20. And they go out and they buy drugs with it. Well, it's up to you then to say no. It is very difficult to watch your child go down that path. Luckily, my children, they've all smoked pot and drank and stuff like that. But I can tell you from their experience as well, especially my youngest son, with the issues that he has, like with his father, he never knew his father. And because of that, he's got a lot of anger towards his father. So he does drink. And it's not any surprise either that his father was a drinker and his grandfather on that side was a drinker. So you have the ancestral part of that, the genetic, the epigenetic parts of that. But then you also have Tyler's part in it now that also he's at this place. And so what I'm trying to teach him is that when you squash down these energies of anger, you don't want to feel that anger or that resentment or that abandonment, so you squash them down with alcohol. You're not really benefiting yourself. You're not helping yourself look at what is all of that about, understanding the healing. And if we can go through the healing process of it, and it doesn't, we've talked about this, the healing process doesn't always have to be painful. For some reason, people think that it's going to be this horrible, painful thing. And sometimes, when we're doing a healing session or we're doing a past life regression, yeah, it is painful. But there are other ways also. Ivory, you do thought field therapy. That's, an experience that has happened in your life that you don't have to go through the painful reliving of it, right?
I've done it for myself because I had a lot of sexual abuse in my lifetime, starting in childhood. And that really screwed up my thinking about myself and about relationships and a lot of different things. And I know that I had to go through a lot of therapy, but even that wasn't enough. When I discovered thought field therapy back in its early days when they called it tapping and it was considered a very fringe thing to do, I was willing to try anything, and I practiced on myself quite a bit. What it does is it removes emotional attachment to painful memories, so that it's like afterwards, when you get to a 0 out of 10, it's like it didn't happen to you. You read about it or saw it in a movie, and that is hugely beneficial to allow you to make more progress with your counseling and other forms of healing. So I've done that for 27 years on myself. I continue to do it as things happen because it helps me. Why would I want to carry trauma around with me for years if I do know how to release it, and I can do it like that and be done and deal with it more, again, taking back like an observer view at it rather than feeling the pain of it. So there are ways. That's not something I do for addiction, though it is good for addiction, but I would not do that just strictly, that's the only way we're treating it. But I want to say from a spiritual point of view, I've had huge success with medical Qigong energy healing and people with addiction. They were at a point where they just they were going through the motions of going to 12 steps and that's it. They weren't doing the steps. They weren't really getting anything out of it. And I said, well, would you be willing to try the medical Qigong energy healing? And they're like, okay. So we did it a couple times a week for a couple weeks, and they started working the steps, and they started, like finding motivation within to get clean, get sober. And so what I saw it does is it helps them get to a place where the treatment they're getting is effective for them, where they're able to benefit from it. It's not like it's a cure-all, but it certainly does something energetically to open people up to be ready to grasp it. So if you have I cannot presently do much of that because of my back, but finally there's more people doing medical qigong. And is that, do you have that in Reiki as well? I am a Reiki master, I just don't do it in my work. Do they do that for addiction as well?
I don't think so, because I very rarely touch when I do your basic Reiki. Sometimes I do, but I usually don't. So I don't think so. But what I was going to say too is a lot of times the clients that I see, or the parents or the spouses that come in, and they don't really understand that I can't work on their loved one, without their ability to want to do it, because I tell them all the time, I can work on your loved one, yeah, but if they're not willing to do the work, and I think it's very important for them to realize that you have to realize that your loved one has to want to do this. And I think that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, is you're watching somebody you love go down the trenches, and they're suffering and they're in pain, and it's hard for you to watch that. But if they don't want the help, again, there's nothing that we can do to make them want to. I think a lot of people, they have to get to that point. I call it hitting bottom. When my ex-husband, and I've said this throughout the whole time, we've been divorced about 7 years, and until he hit rock bottom and he lost his whole family, that's what it took for him to start to go into counseling and to start look at those other things. So I think for some people, they've got to hit that rock bottom.
And when families come to me, and I tell them the same thing any ethical practitioner would, that you do not work on somebody without their permission. But there's great benefit for if someone out there is a family member or loved one of someone with an addiction who is not really getting into treatment, then there's benefit for you in getting these healing sessions, for you in getting
yes, that's a good point,
and clarity, so that it's not hurting you so much, so that you can take a step back emotionally, that you can make clear decisions that are in your best interest and probably in the addict's best interest too, because it can really beat you down spiritually. I've seen that over and over and over with families of addicts of all kinds. I'm sure many people listening to this can relate to that in some way. But like you said, Carrie, there's so many people who don't, they think of addiction as drugs and alcohol. But it's many ways. Overeating is an addiction. Playing on your cell phone has rapidly becoming an addiction. Video games, too much video, anything that's too much, it's not a healthy level, interfering with your other areas of life in any way, then that becomes an addiction. So just looking at it a little differently. I wanted to talk about, we're doing pretty good on time. Is there any other reasons for addiction you wanted to bring up, Carrie Ann?
I think one of the biggest ones that we talked about earlier that we just touched upon was the lower level. Also, the spiritual aspect of it. We've talked about this. When you are going through a spiritual awakening, you may feel as if you're going crazy. And so, again, I was like you in the beginning. I was like, well, I don't want to see these things. And these things, especially when I would go to sleep at night and I would be bombarded. So I think it's important for people to understand that may be happening to you. You're not going crazy. You don't have to numb down those things, but you have to be able to set boundaries again in your life. Somebody taught me a while ago when that was first happening to set boundaries. You cannot come in when I'm sleeping. You cannot enter my bedroom. And so those important, just like we make boundaries in our life, it's important to make those boundaries also. I think, I don't know what you think being in the mental health field, but I think abuse is also very addicting. I think there's two aspects of it. I think there's the person that's doing the abusing. They become addicted to it. They want to have that control over the other person. And then they have the person who is being abused, or, and so they sort of believe I know a lot of my clients come in believing that that person loves them because they want to control them. You know what I mean? So I think you have both sides of the coin when it comes to abuse as well. Have you
It
seen that
can.
in mental
I think
abuse?
abuse is definitely abuse of people, whether it's verbal, emotional, or physical, mental, is can be addictive because it's a release. It's just a way of releasing your emotions, getting angry at people. But as far as being on the other side, I've always felt that that's more of people finding a comfort zone, and comfort zones are not always a healthy place to be.
Mm-hmm.
If you grew up in a dysfunctional family with a lot of abuse, you're likely to marry someone who's going to be abusive because that's your comfort zone. That's what you grew up, that's how it was. You know that's not good. You know it's not,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make you feel good, but you subconsciously seek it out and you stay because that's what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if I could call that an addiction, as more of a very unhealthy comfort zone, just a
Or the
force.
codependency again, because codependency comes into it again, where you think that you can save them. I know I felt that. I can change him.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and usually the abusers can be tend to be very manipulative, and they can be very charming. But the manipulating part is to tell you what you need to hear to keep you hooked. I wish
Yes.
I could change. I know that I could be a better person. Sometimes I think about, that I'm just not being good to you, just enough to keep you hooked. Like, oh, there's a glimmer of hope that they're getting it. They're coming around, and then that behavior is right back again because you can't heal another person. You can't change another person. That's
Exactly.
certainly true with addiction too. Kind of
I
what you
think
were
that's a
saying.
good point.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's a good point, is that, more than ever, I feel like we are beginning to go towards a time where we are clearly focusing on ourselves, healing ourselves. It's not so much about healing. I think people are starting to see, they're finally fully, starting to grasp the concept that if I could heal myself over here, then I can have the things that I want in my life. Or I can, as I heal myself, those people may fall away. And so I don't have to work on healing them. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
having more of an inward focus, I think, because of COVID and everything slowed down, and people were able to then slow down and go within and then work on themselves.
I think so too. I mean, we've all wasted a lot of time trying to heal other people, change other people. And when you come to the realization that the only person you can change is yourself, that's a turning point in life for you because you stop that negative behavior where you have this illusion that you've got some sort of control over others that you never actually had. So I want to talk a little bit about some ways that you can support some traditional methods. I'm not saying this is instead of 12 steps or instead of a recovery center or anything, but just more things to think about from the addict's point of view and both those trying to help them through this. Helping them find a sense of purpose is one of them. Humans need a meaning in life. And right now, boy, I'm sure having so many people come to me wanting to know what their life purpose is,
Mm-hmm.
how to find it, how do you know what it is? I mean, that's really something people are looking for and thinking about right now. So the addicts are no different. When you help them find greater focus of purpose in life, it just it helps them with their treatment, helps them give a reason to put the effort in to go through this. Um, just kind of contributing to the greater good is, I think, one way to put it, or just having a calling that drives daily action. So some of that would be finding, like I used to do this a lot, working in mental health, was suggest to people when they get really mired in what's going on, what they don't have and their problems, volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
Volunteer somewhere that really needs you. And it's almost always a saving grace because they need to think about something other than themselves. So that's one thing. Do you have anything you want to add to
I was
that?
going to say volunteer too. I think it's really important because I think sometimes we tend to get focused on such the negative aspect of everything with ourselves. we don't realize that there are other people out there that don't have nearly as much as we have. I always taught my sons from a young age, we would go donate food and we would go work, at the food kitchen or something, or we would donate toys. And they would always say, Mommy, why don't those people have food or toys? And I was explaining to them, if you don't show your children, they don't know. If your children grow up in a pretty secluded world, they're not really able to see what's out there. And I think the first time we went into the city or something and we saw some homeless people, they were like mortified, like, Mommy, how can those poor people live on the street and they don't even have any shoes? And and I had to share with them that sometimes that there are people like that, but it's up to us who, if we have more, we can give. And it's not always monetary. I tell people all the time, it's not monetary. You can give of your time. You can give clothes that you don't wear anymore, food, things that you don't need around your house. You can donate, unused items, or you can donate your furniture, whatever it is. I think it's important.
Absolutely. It isn't interesting how children can recognize social injustice where some adults don't want to.
Yes.
I had two very powerful lessons, and I've talked about one of them on the show before. For that very reason, my dad he's still a contractor. He just is 84. He's not going out and actually building things, but he would take us out into, I lived in Maryland. He'd drive us to West Virginia, up in the coal mining areas, by these houses that had cracks between the logs of the cabin. The kids were running out in winter in bare feet, filthy clothing. They looked really underfed, and he would just like drive by those places and let us get a look. And my little late worker heart, I'd be crying. I'd be like, we need to help those people. He wanted us to understand, yeah, we're not rich, but we have so much more. Then you realize you are very lucky children. You've got a good home over your head, you've got enough food, you've got warm clothes. The lesson went home. And then another one I had in adulthood that was even more powerful. I was in India, and I was on a trip around the world. I had one day in India, and the travel agency tried to convince me not to go there, but I wanted to see it. So we were in Mumbai, at that time Bombay, for 24 hours. Just landing at the airport and getting to the hotel, as an empath, I was floored, literally, like no energy left, sobbing. Seeing, it was back when all the city was surrounded by the slums that millions of people live in, and I was watching children carrying babies under their arms through filth, and children begging, and just the desperation. You could feel it in the air. And everywhere we went, people were like knocking on the windows of the cabs and begging and pleading and begging on the. I was staying in this hotel that was featured in a movie. It was that hotel that used to be a palace, and it's right on the peninsula at the gateway to India monument. And around it is a high wall. It was a palace at one time. So I'm in my room, and at night I could hear this wailing, and I look out the window, and there's thousands of people begging and wailing on the other side of that wall. It was awful. I left sick as a dog from that 24 hours in India, not because I have anything wrong with India, but because of the desperation and the abject poverty at a level I never imagined. It stayed with me. I never ever forget that. Like I don't care. It helps me with my gratitude practice immensely. I was meant to see that and experience that. It keeps me on track with my gratitude. And
Absolutely.
I'm so grateful. Some other thing you can do is helping people make a contribution. So being part of something bigger than themselves, it helps them just to feel good, whether it's by giving money, shelter, or simply support in something. This is why people in 12-step programs eventually become sponsors. It gives them, they're giving back. Why people do mentorship in their own professional field. You're giving back to someone, paying it forward. I love that movie. Remember that Pay It Forward movie? That's so beautiful.
Yep.
Volunteering, and we talked about that. Just giving back is part of the experience. Taking yourself out of yourself.
And
like
then using that, because we do use our experience a lot of times to help others. I love that part of the 12-step program, that you use that to then go back and to help others, because now you have that experience behind you and you can share with people. You're not just sitting behind a desk and are like, hey, you should do this, this, and this. And that's what I tell clients when I work with them. Hey, I've been there. I've been down there. I know what it feels like to be down there.
a big part of my mission is sharing what I've been through with some relationships with sociopaths, narcissists, and surviving it barely, the last one, but I pay that forward. I had no idea that I was going to have so many women who've been in relationships or are in current relationships like that, but they just find me. It's not, they just do. Energetically, they find me. And every person I know who does this type of work, whatever they've experienced that's trauma, people find them. They just find them for that work. So we pay it forward in that way. And it makes me wonder if we were meant to go through those experiences so we can help. Mindfulness and meditation is another thing. If you're an addict or supporting an addict, encourage them to be in the moment, to do meditation daily, to get grounded, balanced. Addiction pulls you to a point where all you think about is your addiction, getting more of it, and not being able to get it. Then it all centers around that.
What do you usually say to people that say they can't meditate?
I tell them that you think that having thoughts going through your head means you can't meditate, but that's part of meditation. So I like a visualization I have is that you're going to have thoughts come into your head and you're going to notice it, and you're going to be like you're holding the string of a balloon, a helium balloon, and that balloon is the thought that came into your head. So you notice you had a thought, you hold the helium balloon and you just release it and you watch it go off into the air. It's okay. You're going to have thoughts and you're going to notice them and release them. As you continue your meditation practice, you'll have less and less need to do that.
Right.
You just won't have as many thoughts, but it is part of what meditation is. So I think people have that happen and think they're not good at it or not capable of it.
Right.
Really.
I can't do it. I get all these thoughts and I say the same thing. And it's like, and maybe you should try a different meditation, because, it's not just,
It's the hardest time when you're new. Like I like to tell people, go on YouTube and find a guided meditation with visuals that's no more than 20 minutes on a topic that's relevant for you, and watch it in the morning, because when you have somebody guiding you through it, it pushes thoughts out of your head because you're focused on what they're saying, and it really helps. And the visuals also help pull you into the meditation itself. So
Yes.
those are two things you can do.
I started when I was very stressed and had all the anxiety between Sophia being sick and my ex-husband. I actually started meditating at that time just to relax. And I used, there was Oprah and Deepak, and they would always do this guided meditation. And so it'd be like a specific subject, and it would be 21 days. And so 21 days, he really taught me how to meditate. He would talk for maybe 10 minutes, and then he gave you a mantra to say, and then you were quiet for 10 minutes. So it really helped me to foster that meditation practice. I still listen to him because I just love his voice and how calming he is when he speaks.
When I lived in Phoenix for a while, I went to a meditation group because I'd never done that. And it was in downtown Phoenix at a little bookstore. And it started with a gong, and then it was about 40 minutes of silence. Gong, it was over. And I don't know, I liked it. I drove quite a distance to get there to sit in that room for 40 minutes. Then I'd look at books. Gong, always a good reason to go to a bookstore. Another thing is coming back to what Terry Ann said earlier, there's a reason why 12-step groups incorporate a higher power. And let's call it a higher power, because some people get hung up on the term God, because they think that to believe in God, you must be religious. But you can believe in a higher power or source, whatever name you want to put on it, that there's something out there. To me, there's something very scary about the thought of there not being no higher power. I can't imagine not trusting that there is something, because I've just had too many miracles happen to me, and witnessed so many things that just make it impossible. I mean, you can't see angels and hear them and not believe that there's a higher power.
And be like, no, they don't exist.
It's impossible, but having something that's bigger than all of us, some meaning behind all of this, is really helpful for people, so they don't get lost in this. I've got this addiction, it's always going to be this way, nothing's going to change it. They get this hopeless pattern going. So helping them find something bigger than themselves, whatever it is, just acknowledging that it exists can offer really powerful release for some people. There's a lot who say that they found God through 12 step, that they had really resisted it, but some people really don't like 12 step because of that aspect of it. So, it's a very personalized thing, but it does generally help people if you can help them figure out what their higher power means to them and focus on that. And another thing, Terry and Ann and Roz and I have talked about this in so many shows, so there's overlap into all these different areas, but a gratitude practice.
Yes.
So
I think that's very important. I remember saying when Sophia was so sick, I had to really focus on having her and sitting in gratitude that I was blessed with this child, regardless of how she was when she was born. Because, if I went down that alley of, despair and getting negative, it would have pulled me right under, and I knew it. So I always had to stay very positive, and I did that through gratitude journals.
I think, for instance, if you have somebody in your life that's an addict and you've been feeling despair, I think you can flip that around to say, I'm so grateful that my child or my brother or my sister is still living. I'm so glad that there's still a chance for them to find recovery and to have a healthier, happier life. These kind of things are just urgently important for a person to be able to keep their balance through the kind of long-term stress that addiction gives to the families and the friends who love them. It's a very, very long-term, hard thing to go through. Another thing is that I'm so grateful to have friends and family to support me while my loved one's going through this. If you are an addict watching this, it can be, I'm so grateful I found a show that's talking about this. I'm so happy to have, I'm grateful I have some different ways I can approach this and add to my treatment program. I'm grateful to find out it might not be just me having a failing, but it could be an entity, it could be a past life thing, and maybe it gives you direction to go find out exactly what it is for you. Because Terry, do you want to talk about that? Like, I don't know if you've ever had someone come to you for past life who has addiction issues.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people with addiction. Addiction again is one of those things. A lot of times it is just that lesson that's carried over, whether it be addiction or whether it be, a codependent relationship, whatever it is. I find that whatever you have not completed in your other life, usually carrying over now to this life. And it's like, because your soul's like, hey, I'm going to do it this time. I know I'm going to succeed. Give it to me again.
I know, we are so brave on our other side, aren't we? In spirit form, we are heroes all the way, but
right.
I swear we forget what it's like to be human.
So understanding that, I find even, if no healing actually comes out of it that we're doing, just the understanding that because I think a lot of people are not focused on this. We are here as a soul. Our soul has a purpose. Our soul has a mission. We are here to do that work. We've just chosen this vessel to be in. It's not about Terry Ann in this life. It's about Terry Ann's soul, and how can I incorporate the two of them to come together so that my soul can achieve her mission, so she don't have to come back and do this again.
Absolutely. I definitely don't want to do this again.
No. I'm learning that lesson. Just like karmic relationships. When I tell clients, I'm like, look, I had a karmic relationship. I made sure that I was never going to come back and do this lifetime with him again in another lifetime. I wanted to be sure that I could clear up all of those things, like we talked about. Was it our show last week? We talked about past lives.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure that I cleared all that shit off my plate, because next time when she comes back, she doesn't want to be here with him again. So it's funny how, when you're aware of it, I could tell you, I've always been interested in past lives. Even when I was a young child, I would have reoccurring visions of executions and stuff like that. So I always knew, I mean, people probably thought I was crazy, but I always knew there was something else besides just me in this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more people understand that it's the bigger picture. We don't always know the bigger picture, and we're just going by our daily stuff, trying to get through this heavy life. If we look at that bigger picture as to why is it that we're here, and I think that's what you're seeing with the COVID. A lot of people have changed gears. They don't want to stay in that dead end job anymore. They've done it for 20 years and it's drained the hell out of them. So now they're like, I need a higher purpose. What is it?
I have to wonder also, it's occurred to me multiple times that, how we talk about that, let's say in past lives that a person was not kind to those with addiction, that they were not understanding, that they were maybe verbally abusive to them or did mean things to them, then maybe in their next life they decide, you know what, I'm just not getting my lesson. I need to go back and be an addict. I need to develop a serious addiction so that I live that and understand it so that I can grasp this and overcome that fault I have and be a kinder person, a more empathetic person. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there are some people that is the case. And so, I've lost some friends to addiction. I've lost people I love to addiction. And there's a couple of them that have come back to tell me that they were only here to complete their addiction. And I really wasn't sure, what they meant exactly, but the reason that they were gone, that they OD'd, was they were done. That's what they were supposed to experience, and it was fine, and they were supposed to go then and not to be sad about it, that they got what they needed. I'm like, okay,
Right.
all right. I know I'll see them again, but it's a hard pill to swallow,
Mm-hmm.
no pun intended. Um, some of the things that spirit tells me is hard for me to take as well. It's not always what I want to hear or
Right.
believe, but I have to trust that they're on the other side right now, and I'm not. I've got the blocks within me that prevent me from remembering most of what's on the other side. So I have to trust my loved ones who come back, that I know for sure it's them, or angels who are talking to me. They give me the wisdom that I'm not allowed to know while I'm in human form.
Exactly. That's what I tell everybody when I talk about guidance that we receive, whether it's angels, interdimensional beings, our loved ones, no matter our higher self, any of it. We don't know the bigger picture. Aunt told me that early on, it's like food you need to digest. That he can't share the whole meal with me, but it's like food. He has to give me little bits and pieces so I can
Taking a
digest
bite on a fork. Taste this, Mom.
It's Thai food.
Ooh, yum. Anything else you wanted to add on this topic today, Terry Ann?
No, I think we hit everything we needed to hit. It was a great show. I think people will really have a clear understanding of addiction and what it means in the spiritual aspect of it.
And just a reminder, if you're watching this on YouTube, as many do, and you'd like to ask us a question, please send me an email at ivory@sedonasisters.com. Sedona, did I say that right?
Sedona Soul Sisters.
SedonaSoulSisters.com. Lack of sleep is getting to me. So but we'd love to answer your questions. No problem. We're here to help you. Thank you for watching the Sedona Soul Sisters Show. If you'd like more information about us and our services, visit our website, SedonaSoulSisters.com. And tune in next week when the topic is shifting into self-love. We hope that you have an enlightening week.